Hi guys, this is day 31 of the AS Economics Revision Challenge, and today we are doing ADAS framework. ADAS framework is very important because it helps us to establish what we call our equilibrium output and price level. So we're moving away from a micro sort of discussion where we look at a particular goods price or a particular goods quantity. Now we're looking at the quantity or the output produced by the whole economy, and we're also looking at price level of the whole economy. And this is where we're looking at not only one industry or one sort of sector, we're looking at the whole economy's output. And that's why the definition of aggregate demand is that it is the total output or total amount of effective demand in an economy as a whole. It's a total expenditure done by consumers, by firms, by government, and even by foreigners on local goods. So when we look at aggregate demand, we have these components C plus I plus G plus X minus M, where C is basically consumption by households on goods and services. It is the expenditure which is done by household for their consumption of goods and services. So for example, somebody buying a car, somebody buying, for example, cereal, all of that will be consumption by household, and this is basically consumption by households on domestic goods and services. Then comes our investment. Investment is basically expenditure which is done by firms on capital goods, and we'll see that this expenditure is very important because it helps us to have more output in the future. Then comes our government expenditure. In terms of government expenditure, we can look at government expenditure which happens for public goods, for merit goods, also for their own sort of running of the government machinery. They have to spend money to make their function as a government to happen. Next comes what we call our net exports. Net exports, what we say, it is basically the expenditure or revenue from exports minus expenditure from imports. So we find out what we call net total flow that happens because of international trade. So this basically makes up our aggregate demand, which is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Now, when we make a diagram for aggregate demand curve, we find aggregate demand curve to be downward sloping. Our AD curve looks something like this, where when we look at price level, when the price level is on the y-axis and my real GDP or total output is on the x-axis. Just a little note about real GDP. Real GDP means total output that an economy produces, and this is basically controlling for inflation. So if money GDP versus real GDP, money GDP is when you look at total output and you don't control for prices. In other words, money GDP will be GDP at current prices, while the real GDP would be GDP at constant prices, where the prices are kept as constant. So when you look at this diagram, we can see this: when the price level goes down, the real GDP is going up. In other words, price level goes down, our real GDP goes up. And that's why we say this, that the AD curve is what we call a downward sloping curve. Now, why is AD curve downward sloping? That's something which we want to talk about in our next discussion. AD curve is downward sloping because of three reasons. One is what we call income effect, which we'll talk about in 1 minute, then substitution effect and interest rate effect. So what is income effect? Income effect simply says this, that if the price level goes down, we can say this, that the real income or purchasing power purchasing power will go up. Why is that so? Because things are becoming cheaper, so your ability to buy from your same income will go up. So your real income or purchasing power goes up, which result in us to buy more of that good or buy more of all other goods, and that will mean that people will find that the total output or real GDP will go up, since people will buy more goods, firm may invest more, and so on and so forth. So we say this, that if the price level goes down, purchasing power or real income goes up, which makes people buy more, which means consumption will happen more, for example, investment will happen more, and so on, and that basically results in total output or GDP of the economy to go up. On the other hand, substitution effect simply says this, that if the price level goes down in a country, then one could argue this, that the exports will become cheaper. Why? Because now they are produced in an environment where there is low inflation, so exports will become cheaper because the prices are going down, and imports will become expensive. Imports will become expensive, and that means your x minus m will go up, and that in turn means your real GDP will go up. In this income effect, we were seeing how C was going up and how I was going up, because people will spend more, firms will invest more, because now things are becoming cheaper. Here, even domestic firms basically will find that imports will be relatively expensive, because now our price level is going down, and exports will become cheaper because they are now produced in a lower inflationary environment. So that makes our real GDP to actually go up. So that's the second reason why we'll find our AD curve to be downward sloping. The third reason is the interest rate effect, which says basically this, that if the price level goes down, we will suddenly see that people will not be demanding too much of loans or too much of money from other people, because now they don't need to, because things are becoming cheaper. So what we say, when the price level goes down, the demand for money falls, and if the demand for money falls, people are not demanding too much money from people, then there will not be many loans that will be disbursed or that sort of given, and that makes the interest rates to fall. Why would interest rate fall? And the answer is basically, interest rate is what we call the opportunity cost of a loan. Let's say if people are not lending too much, then basically interest rate falls, because as interest rate is like a price of loans. When the interest rate falls, basically two things happen. The cost of borrowing will go down. The incentive to save for people to also go down. Consumption will therefore go up. Why? Because now people are finding it cheaper to borrow. Also, people are not saving because the banks are not giving you enough interest rates out there. So firms will also be investing more, as it's really cheap to borrow. Ultimate result would be the real GDP will go up. So in all of these three effects, what you can sort of see is this, that when your price level is going down, then these three effects happen. If these three effects happen independently, that's another story. But if the price level goes down, real GDP goes up, we spend more, that's your income effect. If your price level goes down, exports become cheaper, imports become relatively expensive, and that's why we're buying more people are buying more of our exports and we're buying less of imports. That's where real GDP goes up. And similarly, in our interest rate effect, we are saying the price level has gone down, causing interest rate to fall. So the key thing to understand is that when the price level goes down, then the income substitution and the interest rate effect happens, which causes the component C, I, or x minus m to change, and therefore GDP to rise in the economy. So that's why AD curve is downward sloping. Now let's talk about why will AD curve shift to the right or to the left. The shift of the AD curve is also called sometimes the demand shock, and this happens because of any change in C, I, G, or x minus m, which is independent of price level. So anytime C, I, G, or x minus m goes up or rises or falls, independent, let me write this, independent of price level, can cause AD to shift. And basically we call such a shift as what we call a demand shock. So shift in the AD curve or shift of the AD curve is called a demand shock. And let's see this in terms of diagram. So if I have price level on my y-axis, I have real GDP on my x-axis, real GDP on my x-axis, and let's say initially my AD curve is AD naught, right? And if I say this for the same price level P naught, right now we are at Y naught, for the same price level, let's say if AD goes up to AD1, that could be because of a reason not related to price level. So any rise in AD, for example, for reason not associated with price level, such as CIG or X minus M going up independently, will cause my AD curve to shift to the right. So let's talk about the reasons why AD will shift. Some reasons why AD can shift are, number one is a fall in interest rate. Well, if there's a fall in interest rate, we know this, that R for interest rate, if our interest rate goes down, basically then the cost of borrowing goes, let me write this, cost of borrowing will fall, your incentive to save will also fall, and that makes C to go up, I to go up, and therefore AD to shift out. So the first reason why AD curve will shift to the right will be because of a fall in interest rates. The second could be what we call a cut in direct taxes, because if the direct taxes go down, we say this, that our disposable income will rise, and this rise in disposable income will make us to buy more, like consumption can go up. In fact, if firms are also paying lower direct taxes, their investment will go up, and that can cause my AD to rise. So that could be the second reason why AD can rise. The third reason why AD can rise could be a fall in exchange rate. When there is a fall in exchange rate, for example, we say this, that exchange rate falls, exports become cheaper, so price of exports will go down, imports become expensive, and that causes X minus M to go up, and in turn that results in AD to go up. So a fall in exchange rate results in net exports to rise because X minus M, because exports are becoming cheaper, imports are becoming expensive, and therefore AD will rise. So that's another what we call independent or exogenous factor that can make my AD curve shift to the right. The last one is a rise in business and consumer confidence. If consumers and businesses are confident about the future, they will want to consume more and invest more, hoping that the future will be better, and that in turn will make the AD to go up as well. In fact, it's a very important component to have a rise in business and consumer confidence. If economy is feeling optimistic about future, the demand in the economy will be strong as people will be spending more money. So these are the factors that can make AD curve shift to the right. Now let's talk about aggregate supply in an economy. The aggregate supply of the economy is the total amount of goods and services that are produced within an economy during a period of time. This is basically all the output that is produced by firms, and we are looking at a particular period of time. The total output or total quantity of output that an economy produces basically depends on the factors of production that an economy has and that the economy has employed. So for a country, for example, the land, labor, capital, and enterprise will tell us how much of an output or how much is the country's productive potential. Now, when we look at a firm's ability to vary its output in the short run, we say that flexibility or that ability to vary your output in the short run is limited. Why? Because in the short run, we feel that firms may not have the ability to alter its factors of production. So for example, if I want to have more labor, I may not have that in the short run. I may need to train labor, which may take a lot longer. Similarly, my plant can become can come to full capacity, which means in order to put another plant, I may need to not do that in the short run. I may only be able to do that in the long run. So firms' ability vary in the short run versus long run in terms of changing its total output level. That is the reason why we have a different short run and long run aggregate supply curve, because the flexibility in the long run is much more than the flexibility in the short run. We say we need to have a different short run aggregate supply curve, we call it SRES, and we may have a different long run aggregate supply curve, which I'm going to talk about in a little while. So when we look at short run aggregate supply curve, short run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping, which means that when the economy's GDP rises, there will be in the short run an increase in price level. And the reason why this happens, where the price level goes up, is simply because when the GDP goes up, or when the firms in an economy are expanding output, they will find that the cost of production will have to increase because of the lack of flexibility. What do we mean by this? Well, if the firms want to increase output, they may need to either hire new workers, and for that they may need to train them, which means the cost of production will go up, or they may need to make the existing worker make existing workers work overtime. And both of these factors, where you're making workers work overtime as well as training new workers, means your cost of production will go up, which means that the firm has to basically increase the price level to justify the increase in cost due to a rise in output. So your output rise may cause your cost of production to rise, and therefore you want to sort of maintain the same profits, and therefore you may need to increase the price level. So that's why we have what we call an upward sloping SRES curve, which suggests that a rise in output will cause the price level to rise. In the long run, however, we have two views. We have LRAS. There is a view of what we call the Keynesian economists, which we are going to discuss in a little while, as well as there is a view of the classical economists. According to the classical economists, this is how the LRAS looks like. So classical economists, classical view is a view where our LRAS is completely vertical. They say that if you are in the long run, then this basically means we are at full employment. So the LRAS is such that it looks like a vertical line. This is my LRAS according to classical view, and this output is what they call YF, which YF means the full employment level of output. Now this suggests this, that, for example, if you are in the long run and if you are basically producing in the long run, then all factors of production are fully employed. So long run, according to classical economists, means that there is full employment and all resources are fully and efficiently employed. Now that also means that, let's say if you are in the long run and currently, let's say your aggregate demand is 80 naught, and let's say price is P naught, and for example if there is a rise in demand that happens because your economy is at full employment, there will only be a rise in price level in the long run, no change in output, because we are already in the long run. The only way in the long run output will change is when the LRAS shift to the right. So for example, if this is your LRAS and if LRAS shifts to the right, so something like this happens. So if they say that if the LRAS is LRAS naught, and let's say LRAS shifts to LRAS 1, then only your YF goes to YF dash. And the reason why this happens is primarily because what they say could be a rise in productive potential. This rise in productive potential happens because, according to the classical theorists, this happens because of a rise in the quality or quantity of factors of production. So in our exams, we may see this kind of a shape of LRAS, which is vertical, which means that we are producing at full employment, which also means that if the LRAS goes to the right, there is a rise in the quality or quantity of factors of production. And this LRAS is just like the PPC, therefore, which shows us the full employment level of output. And we say this LRAS shifting to the right is like a rise in productive potential, which is also sometimes called economic growth. The Keynesians, on the other hand, have a different view about LRAS. According to them, LRAS is not completely vertical. In fact, there is a possibility of LRAS to be perfectly elastic, and then later on it can become perfectly inelastic. So, if the economy is at full employment, of course, LRAS is very much like the classical view, which is vertical. But they say there is a possibility of unemployment even in the long run. So, according to them, there could be a possibility of unemployment in the long run. And if there is unemployment in the long run, then basically even if the AD goes up in this zone of unemployment, so this is 0 to Y1, which is your zone of unemployment, if the AD goes up, the economy has resources to meet that increased demand. So this increased demand can be easily met by a rise by the unused capacity. And that's why AD may go up, you may not see the price level to go up. When the economy is nearing full employment, let's say 82, or at full employment, that's when the pressure on prices will start. So according to the Keynesian economists, because there could be an unemployment in the long run, there could be a possibility that AD may go up and the price level may not rise. But there comes a point when the economy is nearing full employment or at full employment when their view is similar to classical view, which is where a rise in AD will cause the prices to rise because economy is at full employment and therefore they do not have the spare capacity to meet the increased demand. Now that we are done with the discussion of short run and long run, let's talk about the macroeconomic equilibrium. Our macroeconomic equilibrium happens when your AD curve, the AD meets the AS curve, and this is where we get ourselves what we call equilibrium real GDP and price level. As we talked about earlier, that the whole discussion is finding out our equilibrium real GDP and price level. So when we draw our AD-AS curve, this is how it looks like. So in this diagram, AD is meeting AS at point where price level is P naught and real GDP is Y naught. So where the AD meets AS, we get ourselves equilibrium price level of an economy and the GDP or real GDP of the economy. Now, if there is a rise in AD in the short run, let's say if the AD goes up from 80 naught to 81, the GDP will rise, but because economy is meeting this increased demand and the firms may not have the flexibility, the price level will also go up. So what we say in this case is this, that a rise in AD can result in a higher real GDP of the economy because more consumption and investment will mean more output, but that also means the price level will go up and we will have what we call a higher price level. So any change in AD or AS curve will result in basically the GDP or output to change as well as price level to change.